So I think we should start.
Okay.
I'm a big believer in starting on time, doing things on time. What the heck, why not? So welcome everyone here and online to our very first that we know of session on publishing, which Dr. Rudder and I have had a lot of fun putting together. So why don't the people online first introduce yourselves, and then we'll have people here. So if you just say who you are, kind of where you are in the process of being a student or an alumni, and yes, there's so few of us. I think we can even say what's a topic that you're publishing on or interested in publishing on. So Adrienne, you want to go?
Sure. Adrienne, I'm in Toronto, and I am going to defend my dissertation in 2 weeks.
Woohoo!
I have published one article on clinical guidelines for exploring non-monogamy with couples, and future publications will likely be on difficulties with having intercourse.
All right, which was her dissertation topic? Yes, George, are you still here?
I am, yes.
Oh, there you are. Okay, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is George Turner. I'm an alum. I graduated in 2012. I'm in Kansas City, Missouri in private practice and had 6 publications last year and got a few things in the works.
So what are you doing here tonight? I can teach this.
You can always learn more, Betsy. You know that.
I know. Okay,
And my interest is mostly around social work and sexuality.
Great. Margot, are you online? No. Janice, are you online?
Yep, so I'm Janice Miles. I am just finishing my 2nd year of the program. I am pre-PhD, and I have not published anything as of yet, but I've been doing a lot of research on minor attraction and providing treatment to those folks to prevent initial offense and reoffending.
Great. Is there anyone else online that hasn't introduced himself yet?
Hi. My name is Avery Hyman. I'm a 2nd year master's in the program. Have informal publishing. Currently there's a zine that's coming out all about trans bodies and transsexualities that I'm going to be in. And so I just had a couple questions about like cross-publishing, like interview type publishing, things like that. But mostly I just wanted to hear other people's stuff.
Okay. So as we go along, there's a chat availability that you can use, and if we miss it, if any of you notice that there's a question, just repeat it to us so we can make sure they come in with their questions. All right, let's go to the group that's here. There you go. You can introduce yourself.
Okay, hi, I'm Kelly Wasik. I'm first year master's program here, and I haven't published anything, but my interest is working with teenagers and teaching them about like healthy relationships and sex education. So somewhere down the line, probably publishing like a dating guidebook or something for them.
Great, thanks, Kelly. Okay.
Hi, I'm Jenny Brogan. I am 3rd year in the PhD clinical track. I haven't published anything.
Yes.
I have a couple of different interests. I've gotten really interested in mindfulness as a sex therapy modality, especially with same-sex female couples.
Great. Okay. And Lorena?
Hi, my name is Lorena. I am 4th year.
You are you're dissertating.
Yes, I'm writing my dissertation right now, and I published a review of an atlas of sexuality, and I am writing an article with other 3 people that hopefully is going to be published. And of course, in the future, once I finish my dissertation, I want to publish everything about theater of the press that I'm researching right now.
Thank you. Okay, we'll go back there. There you go.
Hi, I'm Patricia Morency. I am in my final semester of the dual degree social work human sexuality program.
Yay.
So I haven't published anything yet, but I'm interested in the intersection of sexuality and cultural differences, like looking through the lens of individualism and collectivism.
Very good. You want to come to my social theory classes? And let's see.
I'm Lindsay Mercier. I'm currently dissertating. I recently published a lesson plan on asexuality, and I'd like to publish so many things, but particularly topics around female orgasm during sleep and menstruation.
Cool. All right. Now, if I can get this turned around, because I think I may have unflipped it somehow. Oh, I think we're good. Yep. So do you want to lead off with the first slide? And since I've been talking.
Sure. So, hello, folks. I hope that you can see these PowerPoints. We have some tech issues with the formatting, but we'll see what happens here. So, was there something where we were potentially not going to do the show? There we go. Okay.
There we go. We'll just do them all.
All right. So one of the things that we were talking about, if you look at these, that there are a couple of different reasons to publish, and some of you, I appreciate that some of you have already published. The rationale is important to think about before you get started. So, for example, if you're really looking for an academic spot, then you might want to send it to an academic journal. If you're looking for a clinical leadership spot, then you look for a clinical journal. I know that sounds simplistic, but you'll save yourself a lot of time with trying to figure out what the end game is. So your potential audience could also be your potential employer. That's one way of thinking about it. And those journal articles are written very differently, right? So the trend as well, and some of you who are new to the doctoral program or in the process of dissertating, some of you have publications already, and the trend generally is that you have at least one pub before admission, but while you're in the doctoral program, you ought to be working on the publication. So it's great that folks from the master's program are here, because if you are interested in doctoral studies, the trend is that you probably will need one or two or more to be competitive for some doctoral programs.
And I can add to that just a bit. And so I was a master's level person for a long time, from the time I was like 22 to 50. And I did publish, not a lot, but some. And I definitely went to academic conferences like ASECT and PodS. So I think even if you're not on for a PhD or not until you're 50, like I did, it just puts you in a kind of a different category when potential employers look at who you are, that you're engaged in, sort of, as we say, the first most important probably thing is to communicate research findings, or just communicate your thinking about a particular topic, and that you've gotten that published just raises you up just a bit.
So I also do appreciate that some folks, we're going to talk about different things to publish potentially. Okay. And so some of you may be interested in, I think you had said, Lindsay, publishing a lesson plan. I think that's great, particularly if you are looking for a education gig or a curriculum design opportunity. I also know that folks have written up presentations from a conference. And so it's a really good use of your time. You've already done the peer review work, because most ASECT are peer-reviewed conference proceedings. So if you've gotten a talk accepted at a peer-reviewed conference, then that is something you could fold into a publication. And folks don't always do that. It's just a really good use of your time and energy, because you've already have the citations, and your PowerPoint is the structure for your article, right? Trying to make it as easy as possible. And one of the things that is also unique to this, that depending on where you are, so my prior university was a research one, and so the expectation was 3 publications a year, which is insane, along with teaching. And so Widener is very different, that they want you to be involved in service and curriculum and teaching and pedagogy. And so publications are still, 1 to 2 a year is good. And so, but I think you and I are at 2 a year, even though we don't need to, because we like writing. right? So,
We like writing with our students, which
yeah,
something
and so we, at some point we'll show you the list of publications that we've done with students, some with them being the first author and some with us being the first author. We'll talk about that as well. But once you get the itch to write, I know it sounds bizarre, but you'll love it. And you'll take on projects or you'll participate in projects. If someone had told me when I was in doctoral program that I would like writing manuscripts, I would have just, no. And some of you have had class with me. I was at my dissertation proposal, and my advisor at the time said that I did not write well, and that she was very concerned.
Nice.
So I ran to the writing center, and so I revised everything, and I used to write like I talk, which is extremely tangential. Those of you who've had me for class, you will get that as well. Turned my writing style around and actually was able to get 4 publications for my dissertation. So that was a really big change in strategy and energy, and I hated writing prior to that whole, I don't know if we would call it an intervention, but it felt like, especially at the proposal stage, to have that kind of intervention.
Right. Good.
Yeah.
So we're going to focus most of what we're going to talk about on journal articles, but we wanted just to acknowledge that there's various venues, and this kind of goes back to why you want to publish. But books and book chapters are a possibility. I'm very excited to say that we just got our contracts yesterday to do a second edition of the Sexual Lives Reader that Robert and I had done years ago, that we're going to do with Jen Pollitt, a graduate, and Jamie Campbell as editors. So we'll be putting out a call for proposals for doing some work for our book. So if you're on the Widener CHSS at googlegroups.com, you'll see occasionally where editors are putting out a call for, hey, would you like to write a chapter for our book? Or sometimes encyclopedias even are coming out. It's a fairly short entry that you can do. So I would say grab any of those that you can, if you can think of an idea for it. It certainly doesn't hurt. At a Research One university, it's the peer-reviewed journal articles that carry more weight than books or book chapters, believe it or not. But hey, it doesn't hurt at all. There's the popular press, it's not gone. And if part of your reason is that you want to change the world and you want to reach a lot of people, you're going to reach more people other than academics in magazines, online, blogging, that kind of thing. So the peer-reviewed journals, we just wanted to point out that I used to think that you had to have original data to write a journal article. So you had to have done your dissertation, you had to have done some original research. But actually, that you can publish quote-unquote theoretical articles, which are really articles that are just making an argument for a particular perspective. I can think of Rita Pillai-Friedman, who with a graduate wrote an article on the importance of grief and loss, as I think it was related to cancer patients.
Yeah.
So instead of going right on when somebody has had cancer to trying to do sex therapy with them as if nothing had changed. She made the argument that therapists really need to attend to the grief and loss for body parts or functioning. Things are not the same as they were before, prostate cancer, breast cancer, whatever. So she had no data on that. She just made an argument, and it was published in the Journal of Marriage and Family, Marriage and Relationships. Sexuality and Relationships. Yeah. Then there's best practices articles, and these can be both on the clinical side and the education side. So you can argue for a particular inclusion of an approach, which I guess is what she did in a way. And then there's the empirical articles, which basically just means they're data-based. So they can be your own original research, or you could tag on to somebody else that's doing it. Sometimes people have data and they're just too nervous to get it out there and get it published. So if they team up with somebody else, they're more likely to get it done. This is one of the reasons that we publish as much as we can with our alumni. So George and I, we've published, what, 3 articles together, George? Yeah. And that's actually been a lot of fun because George is very organized and he keeps it going and makes it happen. And then there's a meta-analysis, which is essentially usually refers to a statistical analysis, but if you've got a topic that you're interested in, you can look at cross studies and really do a synthesis using statistical procedures of what we know in a particular topic. And those are actually wonderful, and they're very useful when people do them. Yeah.
Can you do meta-analysis with like quantitative studies?
I think you could. It would just be a little different. So you would look at if there were several articles that had been published on your topic and they had different themes, you could do a synthesis of, well, how are they similar to or different from each other? Are their findings sort of supporting what they're finding, or are there big differences? But yeah, I mean, especially if there were 5 or more articles on that topic, I think that would be a contribution to the literature. Would make life easier for people who are trying to find the literature, right? Because you've already synthesized it all.
Yeah, I was also going to say, just with when you're talking about empirical articles, one of the things to just think about is, I wish I had done it slightly differently. The folks that are collecting data don't have time to publish it. So ISRC, for example, has
interdisciplinary sex research consortium.
Sex research consortium. And, it changes from collaborative, right? Because consortium has legal reasons. But basically, they have data sets that are ready to be written up. So you may not be first author on that, but or you may need to be involved in some other way with ISRC. But that's an opportunity to publish. And so some of the student publications that I have, it was their data, but they didn't know how to write it up. Or it was my data and I didn't have time to write it up, so they helped me with it, right? So you don't have to necessarily be involved in collecting quantitative data or doing survey sets to get a quantitative article out. And I also, we'll talk about ways to kind of get into the mindset of publishing, but one of the things that I've noticed, because I'm on different editorial boards for journals, is qualitative pieces are very popular if they're well constructed and well written and applicable to the audience. And so for a long time, qualitative, they fit certain journals, but it might be a more difficult acceptance process. But I would say that half the articles are qualitative and half are quantitative, which is really good news for our program, because I would say half our students do qualitative and half do quantitative. So,
can you pick up the next slide?
Sure. So, folks, as well, I know we're going through this kind of quick, but if folks have questions, so this is something that can be, I know this sounds, can be developmental. So you might be really wed to your dissertation topic, or work on it with class.
Excuse me. We're getting some feedback. Annie Pelez? Annie, are you here? Okay, well, let's try it. Looks like it's a little better.
That sounded like it was pretty loud, yeah.
Okay.
Does that sound okay for the folks who are joining us remotely? Could you just do a thumbs up? Because we had a bit of an echo for a while. Thank you. One of the things that you may find is that so for example, I study applying affirmative therapy for same-sex couples. So affirmative therapy is a model that includes a couple of different theories. So that could fit in a journal that's focused on queer folks. It could fit on a journal that's focused on clinical applications. It could fit in a journal that includes social construction theory, because affirmative therapy has narrative and feminist components. So if you just thought it's going to go to an LGBT journal, you'd be limiting yourself, right? So thinking the topic of specialization and then the broadest potential avenues for that, and then you start finding 5 or 6 venues. I think you were saying 6 is a good option.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in the next slide, I think. Yeah.
So this also gets really particular. So I'm from the psychology realm, but I've also worked in the counseling realm, and now I'm in the sexuality realm. And so they all speak slightly differently. And so if you're submitting to a journal, right, another example is really wonderful journal in England called Journal of Sex and Relationship Therapy. They use British English, and so it's counselor with 2 L's, and the spelling's different, and the formatting of things is different. and you just read a couple of the articles, and it's much more, I don't want to say sophisticated, but it's a different level of very formal writing style. And so you have to tweak it to that European journal or that British journal, right? This last part, did you have a?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in on the
Yeah.
field of study thing. So I don't know how many people are interested in academic jobs, but hopefully this is obvious to you at this point. There are very few departments of human sexuality that you can apply to, right? And so most typically you have to apply in another discipline. So the people who have done dual degrees with social work in some ways have the easiest time getting jobs out of our program, because with a social work MSW and a PhD from our program, you can get jobs teaching in social work programs. And certainly other people have gotten jobs. I'm thinking of somebody who used to be an addictions counselor, and she got hired with a PhD from our program in a department of addiction studies. So people kind of be able to trade off their professional background. Somebody else was a student services person as a master's, and then got hired in a student services graduate program with our PhD. But the reason I'm mentioning it now is that if you're going to want to apply in one of those areas, you want to publish in their journals and you want to go to their conferences. So when they're looking at your CV, they recognize you as one of them. Does that make sense? Right? So if you want to, teach in a sociology department, you want to publish at ASA, the American Sociological Association. I'm sorry, you want to present at their conference, and you want to look at sociology journals. So, for instance, people that have done lesson plans, I'm not sure about you, I've published one in the American Journal of Sex Education. Is that what you published as well? Did you do a lesson plan, Lindsay?
Yeah.
Yeah, was it American Journal of Sex Education?
No, it's in the sexual orientation manual.
Oh, okay. Hey, Heather. We have one more person here. That's good. A sexual orientation manual?
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's also a journal called Teaching Sociology that actually has a bigger audience than the American Sex Education journal, because there's more sociologists and they publish lesson plans. So thinking about the field that you want to go into makes an awful lot of sense in terms of where you publish. So I'll just pick up here, I guess, since I'm here. So also this last piece, selecting a journal, depends on, affects how you create the manuscript. If you want to look at the journal that you're going to publish in, if possible, even go to the library and look at it, because I think you see articles in a particular journal differently if you're looking at a hard copy than you do necessarily online, because we kind of go topic by topic rather than a whole journal and what they publish. But you get an idea of, do they kind of tend toward quantitative? Do they tend toward qualitative? If they do qualitative, do they expect enumeration, which I can talk more with you about, or are they strict social constructivists? There's different approaches. So this is going to kind of carry on the same topic. So how do you get started in selecting a journal? First thing we put here is use your reference list. So if you look at your references, what are the journals that have published in your area, right? Because people that you've cited are going to be people that are working in your area. So start with reference lists from papers that you've done on this topic, or certainly if you're dissertating. Also, we have review Molly Wolf's list. So Molly has done an updates every 6 months or so, an Excel spreadsheet listing about 60 or 70 sexuality journals. And I might be able to show it.
Yeah, we have it on shared files view, I believe, right?
We put it so everything that we are showing, we're talking about, I think. I'm not going to try to move off this for right now, but everything that we're using tonight is in the Campus Cruiser committee for the Center for Human Sexuality Studies in shared files, and it's under student information, and then professional development resources, and then publishing and journals. So Molly's list is there. So that's a good place to look. And then some good advice that I actually got, and I really encourage people to do this, although unfortunately I don't always do it myself, so do as I say, not do as I do. But the advice was from a former department chair where I used to teach, and he said if you have an article, try to find 6 journals that you might be able to publish it in. And start with the one with the highest impact factor. And does anybody know what the impact factor means? You people do. Basically, the simplest way of explaining it is that it's a number that's based on articles published in the previous year. It's either 1 or 2 years, and the number of citations those articles have gotten. So they're looking at who's picking up on that article, who's citing that article. And journals that have more citations per article have higher impact factors. Whereas journals with lower impact factors, they either have a smaller audience or people just aren't using their work as much. So the higher impact factor also means it's harder to get in that journal. It's very selective, right? But still, it makes some sense to send it there the first time, because the worst thing that can happen is you get a rejection, and the best thing that could happen is you get some feedback. So if you get some feedback on how you can make it better, then you edit it and you go to your next journal. The thing about having a list is that you don't have to wait 3 months and be depressed about getting rejected before you go, okay, well, maybe I could send it someplace else. You already have your list. Then send it to the second place.
Right.
And eventually, if you're lucky, you get a revise and resubmit, which is very common. It just means, 5 people have looked at your article and they have some suggestions for you. We're going to talk a little bit about that a little bit later. But then, you make those revisions, or you say what you'll do and what you won't do, and send it back. And there's always a chance they still won't take it, but then send it to the next one. So hopefully it's getting better every time. And then what my chair said is send it to L6. If you don't get it published, then just go on to your next article. But I think by the time you get to 6, you would have gotten it published.
So one of the things that I have had, and I think that's a great idea, I also think you'd be surprised, myself included, how many times you might have thought that you caught the formatting correctly, but you made a mistake. So, for example, journals are really strict about page number. We don't necessarily think that way. So we just submitted something end of February that was 25 pages, but the abstract was another page that wasn't in our counting. Right? That manuscript's 26 pages. Their limit's 25, so the editor sends it back, because we can't send this out, it's too long. So immediately we panic, and it's like, oh, okay, we can get rid of a page of text, right? That original manuscript was 47 pages.
Oh.
Right? So we're skipped 47 without references. So now it is 25 with references. So one of the things to really make sure of, because journals hate tables and they hate graphics if you can avoid it, but if you have them, that takes up an entire page. And so, just in general, it takes up the chunk of the page. So just be cautious. If they say 25 pages, think, all right, if I've got a table, I really probably should have only 23 pages of text. It sounds like a very small thing, but it'll just save you time, because then the editor's sending these things back and forth. This is also something that seems like it might feel a little overly familiar, but about 4 or 5 years ago, I started to send my abstract to the editor and kind of float it. Like, I think this is a great fit for your journal, but I don't know what you think. Before I send it to you, we just wanted to save us both time, and they will get back to you. They will be really honest. They'll say, I think it's a great fit, or no, but you might send it here, because you essentially are, being diplomatic and courteous to them. I've been very surprised with how gracious they are. I also think what Betsy was talking about with choosing kind of a top tier journal, or a kind of big kahuna journal is what you might call it. You will, when you submit that, if they review it, you will get amazing feedback. And if they never accept it, you will use that feedback to the next journal, and each time it becomes a stronger and stronger manuscript. So, it's very difficult to get in that top tier, but you get such useful feedback that it's worth sending. Just for that critical dialogue.
Great. I wanted to make sure I think Phil's referred to it in terms of page numbers, but this thing about reading the author guidelines, every journal has author guidelines, and they're very specific. And it includes things like APA or MLA, or it's a medical journal. They've got their own interesting style of citations and formatting. So reading the author guidelines, following really closely, is absolutely important. This also talks about a rubric. So I was at a conference once where the editor of the Journal of Black Sexuality and Relationships, which is a relatively new journal, James Watley. Yeah, he's actually a graduate of our program from Penn. don't know if everybody knew that, but, and he gave us a rubric that they use to review the article, so reviewers use it. And it's in shared files. So I put it in the shared files for this session. And so I would say, I mean, it's almost like an outline. This is, we do this many pages of this, and this much of this, and this much of this. But in general, journals are not interested in a lengthy lit review. They want enough of a lit review that you've placed your research in some context. They don't want a lot on methods, but they want enough to get a sense that this was a solidly designed project. They want more on findings and discussion. And because people have sometimes we can get really attached to our lit reviews, and besides, that's what you've been writing in graduate school for a long time. It's hard to cut, but I bet if you cut, that's probably one of the places that you cut.
Yeah, I would just echo, and I'm just gonna, one of the things that people really struggle with is because we get super excited about, I'm personally a theories geek. So if somebody says affirmative therapy, I'd be like, yeah, narrative looks like this in the room. Your readers know what narrative looks like, so don't lose page numbers describing a well-known theory. You know, more effective would be in session 2, I will talk about the scripts that they inherited from their parents and their culture, because that gets in the way. It also may fold into internalized homophobia, but I'm not talking about that until I'm talking about applying the theory, and that's 2 or 3 sentences, not 5 paragraphs on Michael White or David Epstein, right? So people know it. You know, it's great that you know it. The journal doesn't care. So this final item, which is going to sound like old school, but one of the best ways to edit your paper is to please print it out and go through it and read it out loud. And we are so accustomed to reading things online that you'll catch so much more if you read a hard copy. And I know that many of us don't have good ink cartridges. You see this piece of poop. Right? So we get by and we print when we have to. But if you're looking through a journal and you're ready to send out the manuscript, my personal experience is a hard copy is so much easier to edit, and then you just clean it up and send it out. Don't send it out unless it's super clean. You do not want a reviewer, because I, as a reviewer, will kick it out if there's a misspelling. Like immediately, it's out.
And so this last piece says, ask your colleagues and your peers to review your pieces for you. Don't ever send anything out that at least 2 people haven't already read and give feedback on. And you can do it for each other. Hey, I'll read yours if you'll read mine, kind of thing. It's also a wonderful thing about co-authoring, because you give each other feedback. And so you might be picking up this idea of revision, which people that are dissertating know that that's what you go through with your proposal, never mind with your dissertation. But that stays with you for the rest of your life, because it's not like you just write a paper and submit it to class or whatever. The constant revision process is just what you do. So you write it, give somebody read it, give you feedback, you revise it, you send it in, you get feedback, you revise it, send someplace else, you revise it. It's just the nature of the game. But hopefully it's getting better. Any questions about any of that? I hope you jump in.
Any questions for the folks that are joining us remotely?
Any other comments or additions? You're welcome to jump in. Yeah.
I had a question about relevance. It's Avery. So say that you're submitting it to the Big Kahuna, and then you get an edit, or you submit it to another journal, and you get an edit, and you continue to edit and you continue to edit, but by the time you've edited so much, the material's sort of outdated. Do you modify it and then resubmit it, or do you continue to submit it as is even though the material is outdated? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. So the first thing is, I'll restate it. She was saying if you go through all this revision process and get all this feedback and keep changing, you're at risk of your references being old or your citations being old. And also that happens with people that try to bring papers they wrote 5 years ago into their dissertation. And you've got to really redo the search process. So 2 things I would say in response to that question. One is, it shouldn't take that long. Like any writing, editing, reviewing, revising should happen within 6 to 9 months, I would think. In most cases, you need to get it out the door. But that being said, I know I'm a reviewer for journals as well, and you would really want to see references as much as possible from the last 10 years. If they're older than that, then you need to sort of tell your readers that it's important. So if you have a reference from the 1980s, you would say something like, a classic piece by Gail Rubin, 1987, argued that, da-da-da-da-da, so that your reader knows that you know it's old, right? And generally, writing to your reader, your style of writing happens more in journals than you might think, which is why I encourage you to think about the journal you want to write for, see the tone that people are using. They're looking for transition sentences. They're looking, to tell your reader, where you're going to go, where you are, where you went. Talk directly to your reader. And that's just one example of it, talking about your references.
So I do appreciate that question, because one of the things that I think I mentioned was that so the fourth publication off my dissertation, that info was old. So it was probably 2 years after the data was collected. And so that doesn't feel really old, but it felt too old. Well, but so if you think about this, you collected this. So my example is I collected the data in 97. I sent out the first manuscript in 98 and a half, right? It might have gotten in 99, and then finally was published in 2000, okay? So the fourth one probably went out the door in 2001, so it's not super old, but by the time it was published or ready to be put in the journal, now it's 2003, when the data was collected in 97. So what I did was update, the data's still useful, but in the limitation said, some things have happened, right? So if you were to do, an article now versus an article in November 2015 when same-sex marriage was legalized, right? The climate now is different than it was November 15. So if you did qualitative interviews, you can have national events like the election that impact people's comfort, right? If you were covering sexual orientation, you were covering same-sex marriage rights, that would be a very different article, inclusive of a very different set of literature that might happen in 2014, 2015. Does that make sense? So the data can get old, and you can update it with new citations. You don't have to pitch it. Or you may have an event that occurs that you'll need to address to make the current info salient with what's going on climate-wise.
Or just tell your reader.
Yeah.
These data were collected prior to the Trump election. That may be a factor in the difference.
Almost like a limitation, right?
Absolutely, yeah. But just let them know where you're at. So some of this we've covered.
Well, I'm sorry.
Yeah, sure. No, jump in.
I have a question. So you were mentioning that you would make a list of maybe your top 6 journals that you'd like to publish in. How would you figure out which journal has been cited and accessed more frequently than number 6?
Yeah. So the spreadsheet that Molly Wolf does for us has impact factors.
Oh, okay.
It's the last column over, I think, scroll over. But also, if you're looking for a journal that's not in Molly's list, it should be in their website.
Okay.
What their impact factor is. Or you can tell if they don't have an impact factor, they might say something about their record in terms of acceptances. They might say that 20% of all articles submitted get accepted. And that gives you an idea, too, for how exclusive it is or whatever.
I also I think this is important. I know it's going to feel like a tangent, but some of the journals that are currently out there will ask you to pay to have your article published, and you do not do that.
The online journals particularly.
Yeah, and so the challenge with that is, if you've got 10 to 12 journal articles already in the pipeline and you're floating and you want to do an online one and it's peer reviewed and you have to pay for it, go for it. But if it's your first couple, don't do that, because it jeopardizes the review process. You don't get the feedback's not as thorough at all. And you don't want to put yourself in a position where you feel like you have to do anything more than share your knowledge. You shouldn't have to give them a visa number. This is just something that happened to me about 4 years ago, and I was really stuck because I really wanted to submit on the topic, And my co-author is like, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. And we got it accepted 3 months later somewhere else. So it's tempting, but if they ask for a fee, just confer with colleagues to see whether it's worth it.
But what's happening is some people that are doing research based on grants are factoring the publication cost into their grant application because they know they're going to have to pay fees. But I think Phil is right. Start with the ones that don't charge. So we've already talked about making sure that as you prepare for submission that you follow their formatting requirements, and they can be quite detailed. And Phil kind of briefly mentioned it. As a reviewer, if we see stuff comes in that's sloppy in any way, forget it. It kind of reminded me, I used to be involved in marketing when I was with Planned Parenthood and marketing Planned Parenthood, believe it or not. But I was at a workshop where they say people who are flying a particular airline don't really know how well those engines are maintained. But if the drop-down tray table is dirty, they start to wonder. So I think that's applicable here. If you don't know your APA format, if you've got grammar and spelling issues, they're going to start to question how good your research really is or how intelligent and capable you are of doing this. So it's clean. I mean, it's clean, clean, clean. Submission cover letter. So there's very specific instructions to authors about what they want you to submit to them. Often they'll have two submissions, one with a cover letter that's got the author's names or name, and the other one that's blind, that doesn't have the names of the authors, because peer review is a blind peer review process in most cases. The reviewers have no idea who these authors are. So pay a lot of attention to what they say they want. This is a really key piece. Submit to one journal at a time. When you're doing a book proposal, you can actually send book proposals out to several publishers at the same time. But when it's a journal, you only do one at a time. And it's really just that, believe it or not, people put a lot of work into reviewing your article. And if, Phil and I and three of you had spent a lot of time reviewing an article and giving feedback, and then we see it come out in some other journal, we're like, why did we bother, right? So it's really a respect that you do it one journal at a time. You want to make sure that if you're co-authoring, that there's a primary contact person and that person's email and contact information goes in. They only communicate typically with one author. After you've submitted it, you wait. It varies. Some journals are pretty quick, some are longer. Do you know anything about the range?
It does depend. So some are so fast that you kind of have to be ready. So rule of thumb, my experience is, so I'll get, and I think you're on editorial review boards as well. So you might get a manuscript like first of the month. It's due back to them 2 weeks later. And we're late.
And meanwhile, we've got a lot of other things that we're doing.
And we're not getting paid. Right. So it might get back to them 3 weeks later. And then they give the feedback, and then it goes back to the editor. All of that's collected. So from the time that you send it to the time it gets back to the editor with comments is probably about 5-6 weeks.
Mm-hmm. And then the editor has to synthesize it.
He has to make it palatable, or she has to make it palatable for you. And then it's sent to you with whatever their decision is. Mm-hmm. And then you take as long as you want. They're not going to come after you. So one of the things to keep in mind is if you have something out, be ready about 4 or 5 weeks later for it to come back so that you can turn it back out in a weekend. Unless it's substantive revisions, right? But be able to turn it back in a timely fashion. This is also important. So one of the things that we ask for is when they've done the revision that they send a subsequent cover letter with the resubmit, which tallies or lists the changes made. And so changes to reference page were made on page, This is separate from what you might get if the article is accepted and you get a galley proof. That's different. This is kind of like, here, editor, reviewer 1 said this. So in your cover letter on the resubmit, you'll have, thank you so much for your time. In response to reviewer 1, changes were made, like you just have bullets, and then you send that revision back with that letter. Yeah. And then the editor knows, okay, they caught each point that was sent to them.
So I can tell an interesting story. I was working with a graduate whose dissertation I'd shared, and she got feedback from her the piece. I was the second author, and she had 5 pages of feedback. And she's working full time. She's got a lot going on, and she's like, oh my God, I can't even. I'm swimming in all of this. And so one thing I did for her as the second author was I summarized it all. I created like the bullet point. And you decide which ones are important and which ones are saying the same thing and sort of summarize them. Then I sent it back to her with it listed very systematically, and she goes, "Oh, I can do that now." So if it's a little overwhelming at first, that's one thing to think about, is just create a list of what they have asked, and you don't have to always agree with them. That's really important to say too. Just because reviewer 3 and reviewer 5 said such and such. Meanwhile, reviewer 2 and 1 might have said they loved it. They thought your lit review was perfect. So you have to decide, and you can say that to the editor, because typically the reviewers don't get your comments. It just goes back to the editor. You can say, well, first of all, they might have missed it. So you can say, we did this on page whatever, or you can say, the reason that we didn't do this is this, and they'll still publish it. So don't be too freaked out about thinking that you have to listen to everything they say.
I also, one of the things that you might want to keep in mind is, if you're a coffee drinker, get a cup of coffee. If you're a wine drinker, get a cup of wine. But when you're looking through the reviews, try not to take them personally.
Right.
So I was working in a manuscript, and I did not cite someone whose ego is well invested in the field. And so that review was scathing. And inaccurate, but I, collapsed. So I had to regroup because the other reviewers were like, really love it. So I don't know who that reviewer is, but I went through my references and it's blah 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 from blah 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 university. So I was able to find out who it was, and I went to my references and I was like, all right, I'm going to start including this person. So I included a bunch of that person's citations, sent it back. Oh my gosh, they love it. So sometimes the reviews are their stuff, sometimes you didn't do a great job, and sometimes you did not include a really important person, and that important person, that self-important person, is the reviewer. Right? And that's just one, and there also will be reviews where they're critical and, take it with a grain of salt, but you may have made mistakes beyond. You may have, the journal that I mentioned that was in England, I was all excited about submitting to that. But I did not know that United Kingdom is well beyond us in LGB literature. And so they're like, what about the people in England? What about the people in Scotland? And so it wasn't so much a critique of the manuscript, but there was an element of the content that was really lacking. Right. And so, being able to take it with a grain of salt, but then also try not to take it personally. And it is a numbers game. It's kind of like, plug and chug, just keep on going.
You got to keep on going. Exactly. Yeah. George Turner, are you still there? I may have had to leave. He did his dissertation on.
I'm here.
Oh, you are. I was thinking about the article on adults with developmental disabilities that we published in England. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the language issues you had to deal with?
You caught me off guard. Like, what are you thinking of?
I'm thinking, didn't they have a different, they didn't use intellectual disabilities. They had a different term. Learning?
Yes, they did. They preferred the word learning disability.
Right.
Yes.
And I think there were a few other things. It was for a social work journal. George, fortunately, has taught social work. He knows what they're looking for, but it was really about the role of social workers in advocating for the sexual rights of adults with developmental disabilities. And so I think that was also kind of paying attention to this context that we were in and doing that article. But that was a one he found just by keeping his eye out. Wasn't there, they were doing a special issue on disabilities?
Yeah.
And George noticed it and wrote to me and said, hey, do you think they'd be interested in an article? So he sent it to there was a special edition editor, sent it to her. She said she thought it looked interesting. And I mean, that probably took a year and a half to turn around, right? Because these special editions, they have their own editors, and then they have to sell it to the journal, and it could be kind of complicated. Anybody else got a good war story or anything to share about feedback from journals? No.
I have just.
Oh yeah, sure, Lorena. Yeah, sure.
The only one that I have submitted, I received 4 people, 3 people were like, yes, perfect, just these 3 things. And 1 person rejected, and like 1 or 2 pages of content. And I was like, what? It was, but I went through their content. So what I did, it was like, because the first comment was this person. So I was like, rejected, and it was accepted with changes. So I was like, so I just went through the others first and read and modify my article, and I did this other person last, and that was really helpful for me.
That was smart, but you did get published.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is, so what she's referring to is that even though one of the reviewers would have rejected it, it's still the editor's decision. They don't have to listen to what all their reviewers say. They make a decision whether it's a revise and resubmit or what.
Because it was 3 people accepted and 1 person.
Exactly, yeah. All right, let's keep moving. So the peer review process, so this is covering up some of our slides. There we go, we'll move it around a little bit. So you want to talk about just what happens with peer review? We referred to some of it, but.
So one of the things that I think, oh, down there, okay. So one of the things that I wanted to cover with folks, and I know this has occurred to some, but our field of sexuality and interventions with folks around sexuality topics is underserved in the majority of mental health journals. So what that means is you send it to a counseling journal. The person who's reviewing it does not know what vaginismus is. They do not know what dyspareunia is. They may know how to spell it, but that's about it. Right? And so sometimes you may get feedback that is just at a level where they don't know the content. And so that doesn't mean that you're not going to get published in that journal. In fact, it means that you probably will, because there's such a need for it. And so, you know, it just might mean that you need to, like I said, you don't need to unpack narrative. You might need to unpack vaginismus and dyspareunia and side effects and impact on mental health and functioning, or pelvic floor pain and potential depressive symptoms, where the mental health professional is going to be really excited because you're talking about a topic that they don't have knowledge on, but their readership would love to see. Their comments can sometimes be less knowledgeable and less elegant, just because they don't know. It's not their wheelhouse. But that is a call for you to consider if you're in a profession where you feel, or an education journal where you know that they're going to, you know, gobble up this sexuality content. Just be aware that sometimes the reviewers are not super sophisticated on sexological info.
That's a really good point. I feel like what happens to people here, I've often talked to people finishing their dissertations, and they say, I feel like I've lost all my steam, because it's almost like the more you know you don't know. So people can get, you know, by the time you finish our whole program, you can feel like, I don't know anything, because there's still so much that we don't know. And it's just, you know, it happens to everybody in every field, but I think Phil's point's really well taken, because you know a heck of a lot more than most people know, and a heck of a lot more than most people in your field in many ways who haven't studied sexuality. So the neat thing about what you just said, I think, is that, you know, a lot of you might want to do training for doctors or for therapists or whatever. Well, one way of doing it is publishing in their journals. Right?
Sorry, I have a question.
Sure.
Great. So Phil, just to your point where you said that, you know, sometimes the reviewers, you know, are not giving very sophisticated feedback because this is not their area. How do you address that when you're responding to their comments? You know, I had that happen with the feedback on my article, where it was actually even worse than that. I kind of thought they had like not even read the title of my article, which made it clear that it was for therapists, because their point was, well, doctors would have a different experience. And so, you know, I'm trying to not respond in a snarky manner to say like, yes, they would. That's why my article is for therapists. But
I bet they didn't read your title. I bet they didn't read your abstract. I bet they didn't look at your keywords.
Yeah.
So one of the ways to change that up is to make sure that in keywords you put sex therapy. Right. So,
but how do you respond to the reviewer's comment?
Respectfully.
So, well, so you and I have had class before, so have you ever heard the Columbo approach?
Uh-huh.
All right. So Columbo was this famous detective show, and he would point out the obvious, but he would do it in a very polite way. So you could basically say, it seems that you may have read this as if I was presenting it to OBGYNs, but in fact, I was trying to present this to therapists.
Yeah.
Is there any way that I may be able to facilitate your understanding of the content
Okay.
while responding to your editing suggestions?
Or I'm hoping in my responses that this is clarified.
Yeah, and so, you know, I mean, I think,
Yeah.
but they also may be bringing up something which is, you know, and you can confer directly to the editor and say, before I respond to the reviewer's comments, I wanted to ask you, you know, what is best procedures for making sure that they know that this is for a therapy audience. And so is that the best reviewer? If it is, what would you suggest? Because the editors want you to have a good experience.
Right.
Reviewers don't necessarily care to the same degree because it's just time. And I know that sounds ineloquent, but the editors actually do care. They want to make sure that they get good pieces. So they will help that bridge, but I've done both. I've commented to the reviewers and said, here's my best attempt. However, you know, there are elements of your critique that seem that you might have misunderstood some of the presentation.
Because I could see your point that probably would happen to folks like us a lot if we're publishing outside of sexuality journals.
Right.
And you know, we'll get these comments back and sort of in our heads think, well, this is exactly why I need to publish this article in your journal, because you clearly don't.
Right, yeah.
It's not necessarily going to satisfy.
Yeah. But you know, this is a really useful conversation, because I think the thing I would add is to think about this even as you're writing articles, that you know, the points that Phil's been making is that if you were doing a training for an audience that had very little background in education, you were doing a workshop, you would tailor how you present your work, what you present, you know, assuming what knowledge you need to kind of bring them up to speed on. So you need to kind of think of the same thing when you're doing a journal article in that field, but don't talk above where you think they're going to be located.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I would think your preference is actually to have a blind review, because then you know it's not about personalities. So, you know, and you know it's not necessarily, the example I gave you is really rare. But you know, it's also, I would offer that if you're going to submit to a journal and you're brand new to the game, is go to their editorial board and see who's on the editorial board. Those are their reviewers. And so it will save you some time. Even the ad hoc reviewers or the part-time reviewers are listed there. And so you may really help your manuscript exponentially by seeing if you can utilize one of those people that you haven't. If you have utilized them, hell's bells, that's great.
If you've cited them.
Right, if you've cited them.
Yeah, right.
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah, absolutely.
So I also think around the being a good peer, my own experience with this is, if you ever have the opportunity, I think we talk about this on another process, but if you're interested in Quad S or ASAC and get a chance to review presentations, talks, like, you know, you offer your time to see, you know, help in the screening for these presentations for the conference. That's a good way to start becoming a reviewer. Right. You can also carry that forward and be a reviewer for a journal, right? But I think part of being a good peer is also being really respectful with the feedback and saying, because it is their time, and reviewers do not get paid. Right. And they really actually get almost harassed by the editor. I mean, it's, you know, like, come on, right? And so by the time it gets to you with the reviewer's feedback, they have spent a chunk of time on it. And so if they were really thorough, really try and resonate with being respectful in your response of really appreciating their time. And then also, when I said that list of changes, saying, reviewer 2, wow, you spent so much time on, my conclusions section. Thank you so much. Here's what I got from this, and here's how I've changed it. So, I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, I get requests to review things from about 5 journals. I'm actually not on an editorial board anymore because I just didn't have the time, and so I went off. But they'll send me an email and say, here's an article we think is in your area of interest. Would you be able to review it? And knowing what my next 2 or 3 weeks look at, like, I can't. So I'm starting to refer those to our graduates if I know that we've got a student that published in that area, because I want to give you all more experience being reviewers as well. So that's something you might want to tell your mentors or whatever. Say, hey, I'd like to have some experience doing reviews. If you've got something you could pass on to me. Same thing for being on a scientific committee, which is what it's called when it's Quad S, for instance, or some of the other academic conferences. You're on the scientific, I think it's called scientific committee, that you're reviewing the proposals and deciding, giving your input as to which ones should be accepted. So this is really about co-authoring. We call it developing collaborations. So being strategic just means, is there somebody that that you could write with who think maybe complements your skills and abilities? Like if you know that there's one of your colleagues in your cohort who's really, really good on APA, say, I'm going to be submitting this, but that's not a strength. I'd have you be a second or third author with us if you'd be willing to do that piece, for instance. But normally the first, second, third author work has a list. Well, there's a lot of different ways why it happens. One way it happens, the way I try to use it, is who's put the most work into it, or whose research was this originally. So if it's a graduate, certainly their name is going to be first and I'm going to be second. Sometimes things go out, and if you're working with someone who's very well known in the field, even if they didn't do the most work, you're going to let them have first author, just because it might get read more. Because the thing we haven't really talked about is first getting something published, and then you do want people to read it and cite it if at all possible. And so more people might read it if you are, publishing with someone who's very well known. That's another idea. Overall, rank order of the name list doesn't mean that much. So if you get asked to do something and you're third author, say, sure, that'd be great. Happy to do it.
I mean, one of the examples I have is I used one of my areas is suicide research and assessment. And so I use this instrument, it's called the Suicide Resilience Inventory 25, because it has 25 questions. I am not a methods person. I am not construct validity, like I think I know what that means, right? So I love the instrument, I use it in my survey, and I was like, I think this is just the best thing since, the first surveys that were out there. The author of the survey is Augustine Osmond, who's a resilience guru. And so I had a buddy that was at a nearby university who knew him really well. I was like, do you think he might? And he was interested in writing it up. And so he's the creator of the instrument, but was willing to be third author. But he was also the contact for the journal. So Augustine Osmond has over 150 articles, over 12 books, over 15 grants over his time. So we got in. I mean, I think we had to change punctuation.
It's supposed to be blind review, but still.
Yeah. So, sometimes choice of authorship is, they will be glad to be part of it. In other articles where I'm not, maybe I'm really helping on the writing and the formatting and sending it to the right journal and strategic side. There are a couple where the students are the first 2 authors and I'm third. So I think it is important, depending on what you're looking for. So for example, in academic jobs, the order of your publication sometimes makes a difference if you're going up for promotion. So they want to see that, that you have a couple where you're a sole author or first author. But if you're getting into the publication game, it does not make a difference at all what your order is. You just need to get published.
It's numbers,
And you know, you need to get a couple out the door. The other final thing that I would offer is that I have 3 manuscripts from way back and 1 from maybe just about 4 years ago, but 2 from like 9 years ago and 1 from 4 years ago. And they each had more than 5 authors. Do not do that to yourself. It is so horrific to work with 5 authors. And they were at 5 different universities, and it was painful, right? So it took so much longer. I mean, just to get it in format to send out took 9 months.
No, no more than
That wasn't even no more than 3, just in my experience, that it just is a lot easier if you're navigating with 3 personalities, 3 writing styles, rather than 5 to 7 folks, and you're corralling them, and then you have to send it to them for edits, and then they send you a section of it. It's very cumbersome.
I know those cases of a lot of authors because some of them are students and are like, analyze this part of my data, and you can just put you in my list. But they are not really like reading and editing, you know, it's just acknowledging that they did a part.
That they did a part. And that really relates to this next point
Yeah.
about ask early about responsibilities, expectations, and authorship. So this is where your assertiveness really needs to come in. So if somebody says, hey, will you work with me on this article? You're like, yeah, I'm interested, but you know, I want to make sure I'm being realistic about my time and my skills. So what role do you see me as playing? You know,
Right.
and how are you looking at order of authors, and what are the expectations? Because Lorena's right, there might be a 4th or 5th person who's just on there because they worked on the design of the instrument, but they weren't really involved in writing the article. So, you know, that's very important to be very clear. And then if asking a faculty member to help you write something, get a sense of timeline and priority, because as you know, we're not always the best at getting everything back in a particular time period. And it's really because we've got 3 people wanting us to read their dissertation because they want to graduate and, you know, da-da-da-da-da. But, you know, be realistic. And if they say, you know, I can do this, but it's really going to be July, you know, before I'm going to get to it, then you have to decide if that works for you.
I also just would add that if you are, so 2 of my publications are from 719, sensitive issues. So, and so if you're in sensitive issues, I think they've changed numbers, but the sensitive issues for education folks or sensitive issues for the sex therapy folks, right?
Yeah.
If the instructor says, I think you should send this out. If you want to send this out, please contact me. And so that's 2 people that did that, but I said this is publishable to more than 2 people.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, and those 2 people were on me. I mean, like faculty's like herding cats, right? So, you know, you have to work at it. And we have our other projects, but they were able to get it submitted as first author, me second author, right? And, you know, that is a really good way of kind of connecting the dots. If a faculty member says to you, I think you should send this out, just get super excited and go for it.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I've done the same thing too. And I say at the bottom of a paper, this is really a good lit review. I think, you know, because you can publish a lit review because you put something together in a particular way that nobody quite has before. And if I put on somebody's paper, I think this is really excellent. See me, you know, I expect that person to call or, you know, set up a time to talk to me, and I can walk them through what needs to happen to make it ready for a journal, and help them get it out the door. So absolutely. Recognize co-authors' time limitations. Respond to co-authors' emails and respect mutual deadlines. So yeah.
It also just is important. I mean, I'm just going to
We're getting
stand
toward
here
the end here.
yeah. Just be respectful of also, you know, sometimes we try and do things when we're on break and then you're not on break. You know, so we have the winter break and then we have the summer break. And so, you know, the mutually agreed timelines are really important, and then they're also malleable because life happens. But, you know, be respectful, you know, of your co-authors, how accessible they are over the summer, what they want to do over the summer. So, you know, in general, faculty do like to write over the summer. And so if you have that energy, they will make space for it. And, you know, you wouldn't assume that because folks are off contract, but faculty actually will work on projects over the summer. It's less likely that they'll work on them in my experience, I won't work on stuff on winter break. Because
you need a break.
Yeah, because I need a break.
We took some of what we have here from some slides put together by Dr. Wells, and if you go to this folder that we created in Campus Cruiser, you'll see 2 slideshows that she did also on publishing sex research, but I think some of this was from her. So this is really more, okay, how do you think about what you want to do, whether you're doing sexuality research, clinical practice, or sex ed articles. Look for the ways that the various disciplines discuss and research sexuality and/or clinical sexology. What are the content areas they tend to cover? What's the language that they use? What theories and constructs do you tend to see in that journal? And then writing for various competencies and discipline-specific cultural orientations as well. Think of the impact of publications on communities. I think Dr. Wells has done a lot of HIV/AIDS research with federal grants, and one of the things that when people are doing grant-related research, it's get the publications out the door. But what are the results of these findings going to mean for that community, right? So if it's HIV-positive men and you've learned something about some of their behaviors, is that going to be presented respectfully? So I think she's saying, who's going to be reading it? How is this going to influence sort of stereotypes that people have about any population, and be responsible about that? And then consider the voice you want to have and the message that you want to communicate, and obviously protecting confidentiality and organizations that you've worked with. And that is it for that. Oops, I'm going to call up a few of the other things that we have, and then we can just go into discussion. You can't minimize Zoom. Okay, so I'm going to go back to screen share, and I'm going to look at what else we have.
That's cool.
Okay, so this is the spreadsheet that Molly Wolf has put together. Title of periodical, like British Journal of Sexual Medicine. Who knew it even existed? Publisher, their website, the scope. Is it peer reviewed? And if it's empty, she just didn't know. It wasn't in whatever publication she had. This is not scrolling over. Oh yeah, there it is. Does Widener have it? In that particular case, we don't, but of course you can get it on, Library Loan. Their impact factor, and then the other thing that's important is where is it indexed or abstracted? So this one is in a lot of different databases, and if you go with a journal that's in a lot of databases, it's more likely to be seen, it's more likely to be cited, right, than one that's really not. Like American Journal of Sex Education, as much as we love it, it's not in a lot of databases. So, yeah. So that is there. How do I go back to screen share?
Stop share, the red.
Stop share,
Go back to the
point,
back.
and then share screen and just see. Oh, we wanted to look at the articles. So this is an example of Dr. Rutter's publications, and these are all done with students and or alumni.
So the first one is Kim Fuller's dissertation. So we sent that out in February, and then the next one is Meg O'Brien's paper from 719.
You want to stand here?
Yeah. So so we just sent that out, and then the first one here, is Juan Camarena. That's his paper from 719. And it was not necessarily his dissertation topic, so this was before his dissertation. So he's working on a manuscript right now, and then we're gonna hopefully work to send that out. So here's something that is, I think that I think that Betsy had mentioned this, but so this Alicia Janik was a dual degree human sexuality and PsyD student. And this piece, the one from 2013, where the cursor is, was actually part of a book chapter. So she started to do this work. It was part of her literature review, which is what Dr. Crane was speaking of. And that was folded into a book chapter that Dr. Braybender in clinical psychology is working on. So I was part of that chapter. And then after her dissertation, we utilized some of the book chapter into the findings from her dissertation, and got a second publication, which is from her dissertation.
So one of the things that people don't realize is that when you do another publication, even though the copyright belongs to, say, your dissertation copyright now belongs to whatever that's
Dissertation
abstracts or whatever, where we get it published, or if you write an article, they own the copyright. You can use some of that. I was once told that you had to change at least 25% of the article.
Yep.
And so that's really useful to know, because I know, say, in these articles that I worked on with George, we were able to, use some of the same quotes from the qualitative study, but just the way we introduced them or the way we talked about them was somewhat different to make it work for that audience. So that's kind of useful to know that you can get a lot of pieces out.
And some of the lower ones, the ones on the lower section are actually, so the Darden A, I have one in there that's mine, that I should have removed that. But the 2011 Darden Allison, that was from her dissertation. And then the 2010 and 2008, it was the data from a project that I was doing, but the students were helping with it. Okay, and then the second person she's a methods statistics guru, and I had no clue how to code the data or the themes, and so she got second author because she helped with methods.
Which one is it?
The Rudders. Leach was the statistics person, and Anderson and Saunders.
Okay.
So this is actually kind of cool. Anderson and Saunders were the therapists for the couple. And so they did the interviews for the couple, and I was their clinical supervisor, but then Dr. Leach was the methods person that went through all the themes.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like truly an applied clinical piece, which is kind of cool.
And this Journal of LGBT Issues in Counseling?
Yeah, so Journal of LGBT Issues in Counseling has a really high impact rating because it gets education folks as well as counseling folks. And it was the first counseling-specific journal to really talking about theories and applying it, but also really talking about bringing the education folks in, so school counselors, guidance counselors, school staff. So this was actually the two students were, I'm sorry, the one student was Ferguson, and she was actually a school counselor, and there had been some incidents at the school around the LGBT kids not being treated well. And so we did this whole pre-post test with the counselors around their understanding of awareness, knowledge, and skills about LGBT issues. So she was one of the school counselors, but then she also was able to be part of the publication.
Great, and then maybe just one more, we'll look at mine briefly, and then again, questions or comments are certainly welcome. There we go. So I've got one article that's actually, Angie Town and Elliot Ruggles and I and Megan Root worked on it probably about 4 or 5 years ago and during the research, and we're still working on this piece. It's gone out a couple different times. It didn't get accepted, but Angie now has a job teaching in gender and women's studies at Kansas State, and she's getting some feedback from them and really reorienting it for a gender and women's studies audience. So we're not letting go of it. We still think it's important. So Turner and Crane, George is with us. This is the article from the British Journal of Social Work. Sexually Silenced No More was a title that George had come up with. This Crinity article, Shannon Crinity, was a graduate of our program, and she did her dissertation on perceptions of U.S. medical residents around sexual health instruction that they'd gotten. So it was Crinity and me, and then the other 3 people had all worked with her previously on the instrument that she used for her dissertation. So they got to be co-authors. George and I also did an article for the journal Sexualities, which is also British, isn't it? I think it might be. Yeah. About adults with intellectual disabilities. He saw a possibility of doing an article in a qualitative social work journal, special issue on teaching qualitative research and inquiry. And he suggested to me, hey, what if we write an article together about what it was like for you to be the advisor and for me to be the student and work together to learn qualitative research. So that's an example of something. We didn't collect any data. we just had conversations back and forth and put it together, and we got it published. Pretty cool. And this is one where anybody in our program knows that I've got this whole 4 boxes of gendered sexuality thing going on, and people had told me I should make it into a lesson plan. I'm smart enough to know that I haven't had 625 and 626 like y'all have who are in the education track, and you actually know a lot about writing lesson plans. And so Angie Town, again, was somebody that put the lesson plan together. So it was Crane Town and Crane Seaver for that one. And now I'm working on some books with a few other people. So enough of us talking. Questions, thoughts, feedback? No, you're done. Was it helpful? Were things shared, sort of the nuts and bolts of what it's like to be in this world? I hope it was. I'm gonna get out of here.
Yeah, that was super informative. Thank you so much.
Oh, good, good. I don't know how to get back where I was, but that's okay.
Yeah, so we also have, we're going to try and see if we can clean up the screen a little bit because we lost the people that are online. Can you see us? Okay. There are a couple of documents, and so the one that I would really recommend you check out is the JBSR grid. It's really helpful about how to structure the manuscript.
The rubric, yeah.
And the only thing that we did not talk about in the PowerPoint, which took me a while to figure out, is you may really be excited about being a sole author. And like, great, it's great that you have that energy. Wait, like write with people, learn how to write, get comfort with it. And I didn't do my first sole authorship until, I think it was like 2010. And so there's a chunk of publications before that, and now there's publications since then, and then I had another sole publication in 2015, right? But most of them were with a group of people that have strengths that I don't have. And then I learned how to write, and then you get more comfort with it, and then you can write. Also, if you're thinking about book chapters, just be really cautious about your job setting and how they look at book chapters. And book chapters are really important, and they actually probably get better readership than manuscripts. Manuscript readership is relatively low in the big scheme of
Journal
things.
readership, yeah.
Journal readership.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think you could get dinged if you start to think, I want to write a book. If you're thinking about book chapters and not doing journal articles, because they really are looked at differently depending on the university, if you're talking about an academic opportunity. So for example, that book chapter that I have in 2013 is the first and only, no, I had 2 book chapters. And so now I'm thinking about writing a book, but that's after a bunch of publications and maybe a few book chapters.
So obviously our perspective is academic, and this goes back to our very first slide, I think, in terms of why do you want to publish and who do you want to reach. If you are going into a professional field, not an academic field, and you just want to get clients or get speaking gigs as an educator, then books can be very helpful.
Can really help.
Dr.
Green, for
example. Most important, like Eli Green has his transgender education toolkit, and he's getting requests from all over the country to do presentations. And it's not even on Amazon, it was published by Planned Parenthood of the Finger Lakes. So books can be very helpful. People do ebooks themselves and publish them on Amazon, and that's really okay, especially in the professional field, because again, if you want speaking gigs, you can say, Heather Richards, author as da-da-da-da-da, and that goes on the poster. So since you've got a book, you must know what you're talking about, right? Sometimes it matters more than the PhD. Hi, Tanya, I didn't realize you were with us. Good to see you. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah, Lorena, yeah.
So when you have an article in mind,
Mm-hmm.
do you recommend to select the journal you want to publish it and then write it with that journal in mind?
Yes.
Or you should write the article and then see which fits?
No, I hope that what we've been saying is the first thing to do is select the journal.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you could have, and so I know this sounds simplistic, but semantics are important. So be kind to yourself. Until it's in, it's a manuscript.
Right.
Okay.
It's an article once it's published.
It's published. Once it's published, it's an article. And so that'll help you in the whole review process, because they'll refer to your manuscript. They'll refer to, either cheerleading or scathing commentary on your manuscript. But once it's an article, that means it's in print. Mm-hmm. And then you can get super excited. it also takes the pressure off. If it's a manuscript, to me, that's like a draft, right? You know, it's not fully, it hasn't come to gestation yet, right? So be kind to yourself and just mentally maybe use those two different words to help you just even in this submitting process. Does that make sense?
Other questions or comments? Anything that we didn't address? Because we can keep talking with professors, we do that. I actually did think of one other thing. I was in a pinch one time, actually, when I first got hired at Widener. I was an associate professor where I was, so I came in as, I came in as associate, but they gave me a shorter time to tenure. They don't want to give you a tenure even though I was hired as the director because you might be, not very pleasant to get along with, and they want to know that before they give you tenure. But what I didn't realize, they told me I had 2 years to tenure. So I came in July, I was here first semester trying to learn this program, trying to teach in the program. And I did a retention application, which is what you have to submit with what are your publications, what's your service, what's your teaching, what are your teaching evaluations, all that goes in there. And I got told by the associate dean where we were in education that, he says, by September when you submit this, you've got to have 3 journal articles. And he told me that in January, right? And I was all about teaching 3 courses and da-da-da-da. So I hired a writing coach, and it was probably the best investment I ever made, $75 a session on Skype, and she met with me every week, and she helped me make a plan for what I was going to submit. I submitted 5 manuscripts between January and July, and I got 3 accepted, and I got the job, because I was at risk of losing my job, which, communication, right? But, don't be afraid to hire a writing coach, hire an editor, do what you need to do to get it out there, because I just had a lot of insecurity about writing journal articles at the time. I had gotten a couple out, but I still was somewhat insecure. It just felt like swimming in the big leaves, and I wasn't even sure I knew how to dive yet, So there's a line, don't compare your insides to other people's outsides. You guys heard that? I think maybe an AA line. But a lot of other people look like they're really confident and they got this down, and inside you're trembling. That's true for a lot of people. So if you need various kinds of support, this writing coach, I'm working with her now on the book I'm working on to see if I can't make more progress on it. So, any other last thoughts or questions or? No? All right. Well, Phil's been good working with you on this. Yeah. It's been fun.
Thanks,
and thank you for being here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for including us.
Yep, thank you.
Oh, Brenda was there.
And